London, England, November 7th, 1979. 6:47 p.m. Bob Marley sat in the back of a black Mercedes, being driven through the rain-slicked streets of Brixton toward the Hammersmith Odeon. Tonight's concert was sold out, 18,000 people waiting. The Uprising tour was in full swing, and Bob was exhausted but focused. His driver, Michael, knew the route well. Down Cold Harbor Lane, through the heart of Brixton, where Caribbean immigrants had built a community that reminded Bob of home. The streets were alive even in the rain. Music spilling from shops, the smell of jerk chicken and curry mixing with London's damp air. "Mr. Marley, we're making good time," Michael said. "You'll have 40 minutes before showtime." Bob nodded but didn't respond. He was looking out the window, watching the neighborhood pass by. And then he heard it. A guitar. Faint, but clear. Playing a melody Bob knew intimately because he'd written it. "Stop the car," Bob said suddenly. "Sir?" "Stop the car. Right here." Michael pulled over, confused. They were on a busy street corner, rain falling steadily. "Mr. Marley, we need to..." But Bob was already opening the door. On the corner, sitting on a piece of cardboard, was a young black man. Maybe 19, maybe 20. Soaking wet. Wearing a threadbare jacket that had stopped keeping him warm years ago. In his hands was a battered acoustic guitar, held together with tape and hope. And he was playing Redemption Song. Not perfectly. The guitar was out of tune. His fingers were stiff from cold. But the soul was there. The feeling was there. This kid understood the song. Bob stood on the sidewalk, rain soaking through his jacket, just listening. The young man's eyes were closed. He was singing softly, his voice cracking but honest. "Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds." A small crowd had gathered. Maybe 10 people huddled under umbrellas, watching this kid pour his heart out on a street corner for spare change. In his open guitar case, a few coins, maybe £2 worth. Bob smiled. This was real music. Not the polished version that would play in the Hammersmith Odeon tonight. This was raw. This was survival. This was what music was supposed to be. The young man finished the song and opened his eyes. He saw the small crowd and nodded his thanks. Someone dropped a coin in his case. Then another person. The crowd began to disperse, hurrying away from the rain. And then the young man saw something that made his breath catch. A white man in a suit was walking toward him. Fast. Angry. "Oi, you!" the man shouted. "How many times do I have to tell you? You can't play here. This is private property." The young musician started to gather his things, hands shaking. "Sorry, sir. I'm sorry. I'm leaving." "You're damn right you're leaving." The white man kicked the guitar case. Coins scattered across the wet pavement, rolling into gutters. "Go back where you came from. Nobody wants to hear your noise." 2 other men joined him. One of them spat on the ground near the young musician's feet. "Filthy immigrant, polluting our streets with your..." "Excuse me." The voice cut through the rain like a knife. Deep, calm, dangerous. Bob Marley stepped forward. The 3 white men turned. They saw a black man with dreadlocks, wearing an expensive leather jacket, looking at them with eyes that held no fear. "This boy is just playing music," Bob said quietly. "He's not hurting anyone." "Mind your own business," the suit snarled. "This doesn't concern you." Bob looked past them at the young musician, who was on his hands and knees, desperately trying to collect the coins from the wet ground. His fingers were shaking. He was crying but trying not to show it. "What's your name?" Bob asked him, ignoring the 3 men completely. The young man looked up, tears mixing with rain on his face. "Samuel, sir." "Samuel," Bob repeated. He walked past the 3 men like they didn't exist and knelt beside Samuel, helping him collect the scattered coins. "Samuel what?" "Samuel Morrison?" "Samuel Morrison," Bob said, placing coins carefully into the battered guitar case. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Samuel was staring at Bob now, really seeing him for the first time. The dreadlocks. The face he'd seen on album covers and shop windows. The face he'd seen in magazines. "You're—" Samuel's voice failed him. "I'm Bob," Bob said simply. "And I asked you a question. Where did you learn to play?" I taught myself. From records. From listening. I can't afford lessons, but I try to." One of the white men grabbed Bob's shoulder. "I said mind your own." Bob stood up slowly. He didn't shake the hand off. He just looked at it, then at the man's face. The man's grip loosened. Something in Bob's eyes made him step back. "You kicked this young man's money into the gutter," Bob said, his voice still quiet but carrying an edge now. "You spat at him. You told him to go back where he came from. Where do you think he came from?" "I don't care where." "He came from here," Bob said. "Just like you. But you see his skin, and you think he's less than you. You see him struggling, and instead of helping, you kick him down." The crowd had stopped now. People were watching. More people were gathering. Bob turned back to Samuel. "Play it again." "What?" "Redemption song. Play it again. Right now. Right here." "But they said—" "I don't care what they said. Play." Samuel's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the guitar, but he positioned it, took a breath, and started playing. Bob knelt beside him on the wet cardboard and began to sing. "Old pirates, yes, they rob I—" His voice filled the street. That voice. That legendary voice that had moved millions. Right here on a street corner in Brixton. "Sold I to the merchant ships." Samuel's fingers found their rhythm. The fear started melting away. He was playing with Bob Marley. Actually playing with Bob Marley. Minutes after they took I from the bottomless pit, the crowd that had started to walk away stopped, turned around. More people were coming now, spilling out of shops, looking out windows. Someone recognized Bob and screamed. Then another person. Then another. Within a minute, 50 people surrounded them. Then 100. Then 200. Bob and Samuel kept playing, Bob's voice soaring over the rain, over the traffic, over everything. "Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery." Samuel found his voice. Started singing harmony. His voice was raw, untrained, but real. So real. "None but ourselves can free our minds." The 3 white men who had been harassing Samuel tried to leave, but the crowd had hemmed them in. They stood there, trapped, forced to watch as the man they'd tried to intimidate performed with one of the biggest music stars in the world. The song ended. The street erupted in applause. People were crying, cheering, chanting Bob's name. But Bob wasn't done. He stood up and addressed the crowd, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. This young brother, Samuel, was playing music on this corner. Beautiful music, music from his soul. And these men, he pointed at the 3 white men, told him he couldn't play here, told him to go back where he came from, kicked his money into the street. The crowd turned hostile, angry shouts directed at the 3 men. Bob held up his hand. No, no anger, because anger is what they want. Fear is what they want. Division is what they want. He turned back to Samuel. "Stand up, brother." Samuel stood, guitar clutched in his shaking hands. Bob put his arm around Samuel's shoulders. "This is Samuel Morrison. He taught himself to play guitar by listening to records. He doesn't have money for lessons. He doesn't have money for food. But he has this." Bob gestured to the guitar. "And he has this." Bob put his hand over Samuel's heart. "Soul. Real soul." The crowd applauded again. "Music doesn't belong to the rich," Bob continued. "Music doesn't belong to the powerful. Music belongs to the people. To brothers like Samuel who play on street corners because that's the only stage they have. And if we let people like those men," he gestured toward the 3 white men again, "tell us who can and cannot make music, who can and cannot share their gifts, then we've lost everything." Bob turned to Samuel. "How old are you?" "19, sir." "19. When I was 19, I was playing on street corners too, in Trench Town. People told me I'd never make it, told me to get a real job, told me music was a waste of time. But I didn't listen. You know why? Samuel shook his head. Because music doesn't lie. Music is truth, and nobody can take your truth away from you unless you let them. Bob reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. He took out a thick stack of bills and put them in Samuel's hand. "This is £500, Bob said. "I want you to get that guitar fixed. Get some new strings. Get yourself some food, get a warm coat, and keep playing. Promise me you'll keep playing." Samuel was crying again, but these were different tears. I don't know what to say. "Say you'll keep playing." "I'll keep playing, I promise." Bob smiled. Then he did something that made the crowd gasp. He took off his guitar strap. The guitar he'd been playing with the Wailers for the past 3 years, a custom-made instrument worth thousands of pounds. He held it out to Samuel. What are you doing?" Samuel whispered. "Your guitar is dying," Bob said gently. "It's held together with tape and prayers. This guitar," he pressed it into Samuel's hands, "deserves to be played by someone who understands what it means. Someone who plays from the soul. That's you, Samuel. Take it." "I can't. This is your—" "It was mine," Bob interrupted. "Now it's yours. But only if you promise me something else. Anything. When you make it, and you will make it, remember this moment. Remember what it felt like when people tried to silence you. And when you see another young musician struggling, another street player with a broken guitar and an empty case, you help them. You pass it forward. Can you promise me that?" Samuel clutched the guitar like it was made of gold. "I promise. I swear I promise." Bob pulled Samuel into a hug. The crowd went wild. Cameras were flashing. People were recording on whatever devices they had. Michael, Bob's driver, was pushing through the crowd now. "Mr. Marley, we have to go. You're going to be late for the concert." Bob nodded. But before he left, he turned one more time to the 3 white men who had started all of this. "You tried to put out his light," Bob said. "But you can't put out a light that comes from the soul. Remember that." Then Bob Marley walked back to his Mercedes and drove away into the rainy London night. Samuel Morrison stood on the street corner, holding Bob Marley's guitar, surrounded by hundreds of people who wanted to hear him play. And for the first time in his life, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he mattered. That night, Bob Marley arrived at the Hammersmith Odeon 45 minutes late. The crowd was restless, worried. When he finally took the stage, he didn't apologize for the delay. Instead, he told them about Samuel Morrison. "Today I met a young brother on a street corner," Bob said. "And I remembered why I make music. Not for the stages, not for the money. For the kids like him. For the dreamers. For the ones who play in the rain because music is all they have." The crowd erupted in applause. "So tonight," Bob continued, "I want to dedicate this show to Samuel, and to every street musician in every city who keeps playing even when the world tells them to stop. This is for you." Bob played one of the most powerful concerts of his career that night. Every song had extra fire, extra soul. Because earlier that day, on a rainy street corner in Brixton, he'd remembered what it all meant. Samuel Morrison's life changed forever that day. The video of Bob playing with him on the street went viral before going viral was even a term. News stations picked it up. Magazines wrote about it. Everyone wanted to know about the street musician Bob Marley had given his guitar to. Record labels called. Music schools offered scholarships. But Samuel remembered his promise. He took his time. He studied. He practiced. He never forgot where he came from. 3 years later, in 1982, 1 year after Bob Marley died, Samuel Morrison released his first album. It was called Street Corner, and every song was dedicated to Bob. The album went platinum. Samuel became one of the most respected reggae artists of the 1980s. But he never forgot the promise he made. In 1985, Samuel established the Bob Marley Street Musicians Fund. It provided free instruments, lessons, and support to young musicians who couldn't afford traditional education. Over the next 40 years, the fund would help over 10,000 young artists. Today, Samuel Morrison is 64 years old. He still performs, and at every concert, he tells the story of November 7th, 1979, the day Bob Marley stopped his car, stood in the rain, and reminded the world that music belongs to everyone. Bob's guitar, the one he gave to Samuel that day, is now in a museum, but Samuel had it played first. For 30 years, he toured with that guitar. Because Bob hadn't given it to him to put in a case. He'd given it to him to use, and Samuel used it. Boy, did he use it. The 3 white men who harassed Samuel that day. Nobody remembers their names. They disappeared into history. Footnotes in someone else's triumph story. But Samuel Morrison? His name is remembered. His music is remembered. And most importantly, his promise is remembered. Because on that rainy street corner in Brixton, Bob Marley taught Samuel Morrison the most important lesson any artist can learn. Your music is your truth, and nobody can take your truth away from you unless you let them. So don't let them. Never let them. Keep playing, keep singing, keep creating, because the world needs your light. And sometimes, on a rainy street corner when you least expect it, someone will stop their car, step out into the rain, and remind you that what you're doing matters. Bob Marley did that for Samuel Morrison. And Samuel Morrison spent the rest of his life doing it for others. That's the real legacy. Not the songs, not the fame. The legacy is the light we pass forward, one street corner at a time.